and I'm loving it already because I've been out in the field all day today. I was working on a project down in Warwick, Rhode Island, and I got home probably about a half hour ago, and I was able to just kick off my shoes, throw on some sweatpants, and sit here, and nobody's any the wiser that I'm actually just sitting here in sweatpants, surrounded by all my personal possessions. It's really neat to be able to do this. But anyway, um, the Nickerson site. I don't know how many people who are watching this lecture have actually visited the Nickerson site or actually came down and saw us when we were excavating down there. But it is an amazing site because virtually no one knew it was there. They kind of suspected that it might be there, but nobody actually knew that it was there. Such an important person, such an important family in the history of Cape Cod. And like many sites that are on Cape Cod, people just sort of take it for granted that the home site is somewhere out there, and no one had really stopped and thought about where exactly it might be. And then we're going to talk a little bit about why it's important to know where things like this home site is in terms of protecting it and in terms of preserving it for the future, and in terms of educating people about the past. So a little bit about William Nickerson. He, of course, was the founder of Chatham. His wife were the founders of Chatham. He was born in Norwich, England, 1604. In 1630, about 1630, married Anne Busby. In 1637, they moved to Boston with Anne's family. And about 1640, he moved to Yarmouth. We don't know exactly why they moved to Yarmouth. We think possibly the Cape Cod was a land that was a little less populated by Europeans, and so he maybe thought it was an opportunity for him to be able to gain some land, be able to establish himself, establish his own farmstead, establish his own family, maybe do things the way that he really wanted to do them. And we have some information that comes from the actual historical record. One of the most famous ones is in 1641. He was accused of being a scoffer and jeerer of religion. And a lot of people see that and say, oh, well, he must have been a real cranky guy. He must have been someone who wasn't really too religious because he was scoffing and jeering at the religion. But when you actually read the rest of the historical document, you find out that he was a scoffer and jeerer more of the minister who was there versus the actual religion. There were a number of highly influential people in Yarmouth at that time who were scoffers and jeerers of the actual minister who was there. They eventually drove him out of town. I believe it was Matthews. His last name was Matthews. And they eventually drove him out of town. They never said exactly why they didn't like what he was preaching or the way he was preaching it, but it actually shows that he was a very religious person and was scoffing and jeering to get this guy out, basically. In 1656 is one of the things that really started getting him in trouble with the Plymouth colony. And he bought land illegally from the native chief Metaquasin in what's now Chatham. Illegally because he did not get permission from Plymouth colony to actually buy this land. Plymouth colony didn't mind if people bought land from the natives. They wanted to acquire every bit of land they could from the natives, but they wanted to make sure that it was done legally. It was done through the Plymouth government. There had been a number of court cases where things happened where one person claimed to buy the land, and then another person claimed they bought the same land, and because it hadn't gone through the Plymouth courts, they couldn't prove who actually owned it. Another thing that was done is that a native person who claimed to own the land would go and sell this piece of land, and then the Europeans, the English, would show up there and start settling it, and suddenly another native person would come out and say that actually he owned the land. And so sometimes the English would have to pay double for the same piece of land because they weren't exactly sure who owned the land. And so they wanted to control who was purchasing the land. But William Nickerson, however, whatever, why ever, he purchased this land himself. Maybe he thought he'd register it later or something. We don't really know. We don't know exactly what his plans were. But in 1656, whatever he had originally planned was kind of put on hold because his wife's family were sick up in Boston. They moved up to Boston. Now, we didn't know a lot about William Nickerson in terms of how well off he might be based on the historical records. There isn't a lot in there. We know that he was trained as a weaver. And then we find out he was a software engineer, he was buying land, but it doesn't really tell us a lot about how well off he was. But if you start looking more in depth at the records, we found that when he moved to Boston, he didn't just move to Boston and move in somewhere and start living somewhere, renting or whatever. He actually bought a house. He bought a house in Boston, and not only that, he started rebuilding the house. He started renovating the house immediately as soon as he got to Boston. Now, someone who's of a lower social class, someone who's poor, is not the kind of person that's able to do that sort of thing. He had to have been someone who had some money to be able to actually go to Boston at the time and buy land. It's Boston back then. It was just like Boston nowadays. It's expensive to live there, expensive to buy land and build a house. And so he was able to go right up there and do that. And he stayed there for a number of years until 1661. Then he moved back to Yarmouth. One of the things that's really well known about William Nickerson is he loved the courts. He loved taking people to court. He loved suing people. And people would sue him sometimes too. But he loved suing people. And again, that's another indication about how well off he was, because you had to have money to be able to sue people back then. Because if you lost, you had to pay the court costs for yourself as well as for the other person that you're suing. So he would take people to court for slander and for not making the barrels right and all sorts of little things. So again, it shows a bit that he was kind of well off. Sometime between 1661 and 1664, he moved to that land in Chatham. And then in 1686, he conveyed the home site to his daughter, Sarah Covell, and he died somewhere around 1690. And his wife had preceded him. She had died before him. And that's about all we really know about him. Unfortunately, there's no will, no probate. A lot of times archaeologists love finding probate because it'll tell us exactly what's in the house. And sometimes it'll even tell us exactly what the house looked like, the layout of the house, the different rooms, that sort of thing. We didn't have any of that for William Nickerson. So before we started the project, we kind of thought about what it would be like, what a house on Cape Cod at that time would be like. This is the edge of the world, basically. This is about as far out to the east on Cape Cod as you can go back then. We figured he probably would have had a little small house. It was just he and his wife. I mean, they were in their 60s by that time when they moved down there. We figured it would just be a little small house, little cottage, little retirement home, something like that on Cape Cod. And we were definitely not expecting what we ended up finding there. The William Nickerson home site, you can see where this is the Nickerson property, the Nickerson Family Association property. This is an aerial view, obviously. And the home site is located off in the woods. It's actually not owned by the William Nickerson family. It's owned by the Chatham Conservation Foundation. They own the majority of it. A small portion is owned by the Nickerson Family Association, but the majority is the Chatham Conservation Foundation. So this entire project has been a close collaboration between the Nickerson family and the Chatham Conservation Foundation that owns the site. It's been a really close collaboration that I think has worked out really, really well for everyone. And this whole thing started in 2016. And this was the result of another community archaeology project that I've been putting on down in Yarmouth at Taylor Bray Farm, which is a nice connection since William Nickerson originally moved to Yarmouth and he went to Chatham. But one of the people who had volunteered down at the Taylor Bray Farm dig was a woman named Patricia Noyes. And she had also worked with the Nickerson family. And she had asked me once if I'd like to come down and see it. She said that, the Nickersons say that the family house, the original William Nickerson house, is located out in the woods down near the Nickerson Family Association. And so I was kind of skeptical, but you never know what might happen. So I went down there with her and met with the Nickerson Family Association. And they asked me if I could do a little dig and maybe try to find the house. Now, I didn't have a lot of high hopes when we started this project. When I looked at the maps, the soil map said that most of the land around it was swamp. Around the Nickerson family's property was swamp, did not have a high probability. One of the areas that was not swamp was where the Nickerson family has their archives, and has the other Nickerson house they brought to the property. And I looked at it, I saw there was a big driveway there, and there's what looked like wetlands around it, and I didn't have a lot of hope. But the Nickersons, they were insistent. They were sure that his home site was located out in the woods, right where they had put a marking stone. 9 times out of 10, when archaeologists see a marking stone that a historical society has put up, we're pretty sure that does not really, identify where a home site or an historical event happened. I mean, it's a lot of it's based on folklore. It's based on some 19th century historians. They happen to write something down, and you know, we generally don't really believe it happened. I had the feeling that it was probably most likely located up near where the Nickerson buildings are nowadays. And so I put a transect of test pits in. You can see it on the map here. Let's see here. Right over here, this transect that's right here. We put this in. My son Alden and I, we dug a number of test pits along this line. Because I was pretty sure we were going to find it. We also dug a couple of test pits over here in the corner. And then just to set a couple of the other volunteers, Blaine Borden and Bruce Brockway, I had them put one out here, put a couple of test pits out here. Again, I didn't really have high hopes that they would actually find anything, but I wanted them to go out there and try to dig a couple of pits and see, satisfy the Nickerson's curiosity out there, basically. So I'm just trying to forward here. Let's get rid of those. Trying to get my computer to catch up. So I had them go out there and dig it. And when we first went out to that area out there, it was unbelievably overgrown with all sorts of different kinds of plants, mostly this honeysuckle plant that was out there. Really nasty stuff, hard to cut through, very thick, very viney, very nasty. And so there's one little area that they could dig out there. And so I had them, just dig one small test pit that was out there with the hope that maybe, they'd be able to find something that's out there. I was waiting for my slide to move ahead here. But anyway, we'll just keep going. Eventually it'll catch up, right? So anyway, I had them go out there and dig that, again, without any hopes. While Alden and I dug the other area, dug the test pits in the other area. We dug these test pits and we found nothing but a really large nail, a nail that was probably about 12 inches long, that we assumed somehow was related to the house when they moved the Nickersons moved the house onto the property not too many years earlier. What the guys out in the woods find, what Bruce and Blaine had found out there was just what we needed to be able to say that William and Ann had lived on the property. They were finding ceramics that only dated to the later part of the 17th century. They weren't made into the 18th century. They weren't made into the 19th century. They were finding, in this one test pit, mind you, they were finding pieces of clay pipes that only date to the later part of the 17th century. They also found a feature. They found a post hole, what looked like a post hole. It was basically a hole that was dug in the ground that you'd insert a post for like a building. And we knew that early houses in the 17th century would have these sorts of things. They'd be built that way. We built with posts in the ground, basically. And so it really seemed like they were right on where things should be, basically. And so we talked to the Nickersons. We told them what we had found and what the possibilities were. And we told them that, it was all so overgrown, there was really not much we could do until we actually were able to go and clear that out. And so the Nickersons worked with the Chatham Conservation Foundation, and they cleared the land out. They cleared all the invasive exotics. This is not native plants that are down there. These are not native bushes that are down there or anything. These are all plants that have invaded Cape Cod and plants that have taken over and just nasty stuff. And so they were able to clear all that out of there for us so that the following year in 2017, they raised funds and we were able to actually go out there and dig a number of other test pits across the property as a way to try to see exactly what's out there, if there's more evidence of that 17th century occupation that was there. And what we found is that the land actually was a lot better looking than we thought originally. It was not swampland. It was a nice high little knoll overlooking some wetlands that were there. Sort of the perfect spot for somebody to be living in the 17th century. Let's see if I can get this stuff forward here. Hey, look at that, it's forwarded. All right, so this is what the site looked at before. You can see all the nasty honeysuckle that's all around here. And this is the only area they could really dig. This is the marker. And they were able to dig right in this area here. Sort of a 1 in a million shot that they would actually find something that would actually date right to the right time period. And these are the sorts of things that they found. We had fragments. These are all very small fragments. Anybody who's been on the dig or even seen some archaeological digs, some real archaeological digs, not that stuff they have down in Jamestown where they're pulling out whole muskets and that kind of stuff. Real archaeological digs, you'll find little fragments of things. You'll things the size of your thumbnail. And we found pieces of slip decorated redware plates, probably made locally in Massachusetts, German Westerwald jugs, German Bellarmine jugs, the Staffordshire slipware made over in England, North Devon gravel tempered pans, and most importantly, though it didn't look like a lot, was this little redware pipe stem. We knew these were only made between about 1670 and 1690. And so to find that was a real clincher for me that we were right on the site. We knew that nobody else was living around there in this area. We know that there wasn't anyone else who was there in the 17th century. So, we were pretty sure it had to be it. This is that post hole that they found. You can see the outline. This is the regular natural subsoil. Here's the post hole, and it even had a wooden post in it, which was kind of surprising. We weren't sure if it was really that old or not since it had a wooden post in it, but it was there, and it was beautiful, and we loved it. And so we were able to go back out and do some more work the following year to be able to see what else was out there. There we go. Oh, that's another thing that was really important that we found was little bits of slag. Doesn't look too impressive, but finding slag on the site gave us a little hint that maybe something else was going on there. We don't find a lot of slag, and it's an indication that somebody was working metal, not just like blacksmithing working metal, but taking raw iron ore and making it into iron, which is really unheard of again on Cape Cod or anywhere in Massachusetts. Gives you a little idea where the project area is. Ryder Cove there. 2017, all that nasty underbrush is gone, and we were able to get a clear shot of what's out there and dig these test pits across the property. It lasted for a couple of weeks, and we found the hearth of the house. We found post holes that were associated with the house. We found lots more artifacts. Again, it was just a really amazing couple of weeks. You can see these are our little test pits. Each one of these is a 50-centimeter square. And then in some areas, we open up larger units to be able to expose more. We found a number of features, things that could be post holes, very tantalizing things. Again, lots more artifacts that dated right to the right time period. And we're starting to give us a good picture about what William Nickerson's house was. And we thought it was probably we were still thinking that it was probably a little cottage, some kind of little house. Again, we didn't expect it to be anything too dramatic. There's some more. That's that post hole. You can see we draw everything, we photograph it. Everything's cataloged. Everything gets washed. Everything's going to go back to the Nickersons. They're going to have it there. There's an agreement with the Chatham Conservation Foundation. A lot of evidence of Native Americans, not surprisingly. If it's a nice site for Europeans, then it's a nice site where Native Americans were as well. We found a lot of these arrowheads, these ones that they were in the process of making, that dated back to what we call the late woodland period. It's about 1,000 to about 300 years ago. And the clay pipes. Clay pipes are great for archaeologists because a lot of times they have marks, like the one in the center down on the bottom here. It has the letters LE on it. And we know that that maker was only making those pipes between about 1660 and 1690. So again, right in the right time period. And then there's another red clay pipe up there in the corner. So again, we had more and more evidence that we were right on the right spot. More of those same kind of ceramics that we had before. The redware, the slipware, the Westerwalds. And so in 2018, we were able to go back. The Chatham Conservation Foundation and the Nickerson family were able to get CPA money, Community Preservation Act money, to be able to pay for the excavations this year in 2018. And that's money that basically the people of Chatham pay through taxes, and then it's matched by the state of Massachusetts. And so as a result, we were able to excavate a larger area and find exactly what the house looked like. And one of the really interesting things we found is that part of the house had burned, that it had a chimney and fireplace that were made from wattle and daub, from sticks and clay, just like the ones at Plymouth Plantation. And at some point that burned, and when it burned, it collapsed inside the house and buried lots of artifacts inside of there, like the piece of ceramic you see right in the center of the screen here. It's a nice big piece of German Westerwald. And we found enough pieces of that, we were able to reconstruct the vessel, the entire vessel, from the 1660s, 1670s. This is what we excavated that year. Each of these squares that you see here measures 1 meter, about 39 inches square. And we excavated all these squares across the property. The marker for the Nickerson family erected is down towards the bottom of our excavation area, and the rest of the area is out there in the actual property of the Chatham Conservation Foundation. So if we take away where the unit squares were, this is what we have left. And what we have is a sort of L-shaped feature that runs around the side over here, down there, and up on the top. It's a palisade. We found an actual wooden palisade that was about 3 feet deep, about 3 feet wide, that was built around the house. The Nickersons built around their house. And we think it's probably dated to around the 1670s, around the time of King Philip's War. King Philip's War didn't affect Cape Cod too much, but people were probably still a little nervous about, the fact there were Native Americans around. You didn't know what their loyalties were. And so better to be safe than sorry. It appears that William Nickerson built this palisade around his house. And one of the really interesting things is that we actually still found some of the wood from the palisade inside the trench. And it's pretty unheard of to find wood from the 17th century that still survives. We found some inside the trench, and we were able to measure it and see exactly how it was laid out within that trench. And then in the center part here, we had the collapsed chimney. That's the chimney I'd showed you the picture of the ceramics before. It's one collapsed chimney here. And then it's a beautiful brick chimney, brick and stone chimney down here at this end of the house. Let's see if we go ahead. And so we were able to outline the entire house, the entire size of the house, which came out to be about 50 feet long by about 16 feet wide. And again, it's something that's really unheard of in the 17th century, especially on what was essentially the frontier here on Cape Cod, to build a house that big, especially just for the two of them. It was William and Anne. Their children lived in the area, in the neighborhood around there. They had separate home sites and such, but this is just for William and Anne, basically. They built this really, really big house, really complex house, which is basically a mansion. It's basically the first Cape Cod mansion that was built out there. And when they constructed it, they actually had dug through a Native American shell midden that was out there on the site to level the property off. And so we found tens of thousands of pieces of shell scattered across the excavation. That was the result of them digging through that shell midden and basically just spreading it across their site, basically, across their home site, basically. Each of these little stains that you see here represent post holes. In some cases, like this one here, there's actually a burned post in the center of it that still remained. And this is the same way that houses were built up in Plymouth. Again, it's a nice correlation between what was going on in Plymouth and what was going on here at this site as well. And so at the end of the 2018 excavations, we had a really good idea about what the house looked like. We had a good idea about the palisade that went around the house. But then we also had this weird feature that was out here. This is a cellar hole that we found. We determined it measured about 4 feet wide and about 5 or 6 feet long. No cellar hole inside the house, no cellar hole underneath the floors, but a cellar hole out in the yard where we didn't expect to find it. And so we felt that there was a need to do more archaeological work here. We were finding a lot of evidence of the slag and also of iron oxide, chunks of iron oxide. They were first identified by another one of the volunteers, George Slammer, and he identified this iron oxide that was there, and that's the stuff that's the raw material for making into iron in the 17th century. And so as a result, we felt there was more that could be done at the site. And so we were able to get permission from the community preservation uh, folks to get more funding, and also from the Chatham Conservation Foundation. Enabled to, they enabled us to do more archaeology out there. So in 2019, we conducted further excavations at the site. And we didn't do any more work where the house was. We didn't do any more work on the palisade so much. We were focused more down here on the cellar hole, and also down in this area to the south of where the cellar hole is. And we felt represented maybe an industrial area, a place that maybe William Nickerson was where he was smelting his iron or something. And so our excavations then, as I said, were all focused down in that area there. And just as our previous excavations had been carried out, it was done by volunteers, mostly by volunteers. There was one person who got paid, well, two people, counting myself, but all the rest of the work was just volunteers who had signed up for it, volunteers that had worked at Taylor Bray with me, volunteers that had been down there in 2018, and volunteers who wanted to continue to work to explore more about the William Nickerson home site. And so I'm actually going to be doing another lecture this month that's going to talk about the 2019 work. But I wanted to say, well, one of the things we did is we further excavated the cellar hole here. We opened it up. We opened up the area around the cellar hole in order to try to see if there was a building around it, or if this was just some kind of weird cellar hole that was out in the middle of the yard. And so we actually ended up finding more post holes around that cellar hole, and identified another building, which we're still not sure exactly what it was. There was no hearth inside of it. There was no chimney. So we think it may have been a barn located outside the palisade for some reason, maybe predating when they built the palisade. A barn that was used out there with a cellar underneath of it, which is something that would be done in England. It's something that, has not really been found here in the New World, but something that we think we had down there. Along with features like that, we also found some really interesting artifacts. In 2018, we found a silver coin. One of the volunteers, Gary Nickerson, retired judge, who was actually a Nickerson descendant, of course, he found this coin. I wasn't on the site. I was off doing a different project for the day, of course. And I got a text with an image, and it was the image of the 17th century coin, this 1652 oak tree sixpence. And I got the image of the coin, and I thought they were pulling a fast one on me. I thought they were just joking around with me. And I said, "Oh yeah, sure you found that." They called me up and said, "No, we really found it. Gary just found it." And what had happened is Gary was excavating. He brought the dirt over to the screen, poured the dirt into the screen, and started sifting, and saw this silver thing in there. And his first thought was, "Why is there a washer? What's this washer doing inside the screen? Did the washer fall off the screen? What's it doing in there?" And he showed it to one of the other volunteers that was out there, Greg Lott. And Greg Lott, his eyes popped open, I guess. He said, "You don't even understand what you have there." And he told him about it, and then they told me about it. And it's one of the only ones that's ever been found in Massachusetts. It's generated a lot of interest among the numismatic community. There's another one of the volunteers, somehow related to one of the volunteers. He was a professor at, I think it was at Yale, and he was able to study the coin. And he actually published an article about that coin. Because it was so rare, because it was so interesting. It was dated 1652, but he actually thinks it was made in the 1660s. And these coins that were made in Massachusetts were originally made in 1652, but then the king told them they couldn't make any more coins. But they continued to make them, and they just kept the same date on them, basically, as a way of kind of getting around. So the king would never be sure exactly when the coin was made. So, and we found one down there. As I said, they're really, really rare, and worth something in the range of like $12,000. So, and then in 2019, another one of the volunteers, local Chatham guy, his son was digging and found another coin. He found a Charles I groat, another rare coin, silver coin, which again got the numismatic community excited as well, because again, those had not been found before. And so they were able to look at that, and I think he published that in the same article there. Aside from that, we found a lot of other artifacts that were down there. We found a lot of things that were sort of the same as pieces we had found before. And at the end of the excavations in 2019, literally on the last day, we had the machine coming out. We were starting to fill in the holes. We had a machine that was donated to us We weren't using it. There was an operator who was using it, starting to fill in the holes. We were just finishing up this little stain that another volunteer had found. It had some shell in it. Looked kind of interesting. We just wanted to finish it up, get it all finished off. Often happens on the last day of an archaeological dig, turns into something really impressive. This little stain ended up turning into about a 3-foot wide by about 4-foot deep Native American storage pit that was full of shell and pieces of pottery and other pieces of Native American material culture, flakes and things like that. And we were going really fast, trying to finish up that feature, excavate that feature. We have to photograph it and draw it and record it as we excavate the whole thing. So the machine is filling in around us in the rest of the area. We're quickly trying to finish up this feature, and we finally got it all finished up and excavated. And it had just tens of thousands of shells inside of it, as well as those pieces of pottery. And that's all things that we're still going to be investigating further. In fact, we've got more. We're hoping to get more CPA funding this year to really wrap up all the work that was done out there. We're going to send off some of the shell for radiocarbon dating to try to see how close in time that Native American feature was to the Nickerson occupation. Was it just before? Was it 1,000 years before? And so that'll be important, as well as taking samples of the shell from the Midden, the Native American shell Midden that was dug through by the Nickersons. So we're able to look at that and see when that dates to as well. Then we're also sending out some items for conservation to get the pieces so that they'll be stabilized, so they could be put on display. We had things that were made out of metal. We don't want those things to rust away. And so they need to be stabilized. We're sending that down to Maryland, hopefully, to get the funding to be able to get that stabilized. And then also, another thing we had done is save bags and bags and bags and hundreds of bags of dirt. Anytime we were excavating any of these features, any of these soil stains down there, we are saving some of the dirt. We're hoping to find things like seeds that'll be able to tell us what they were eating down at the Nickerson site. As far as like plants, the plants that they were eating, the wheats and corn and things like that. We have some evidence that we had found previously, but we're hoping to find very small things, small seeds inside these flotation samples. So that's something else we're going to be doing as well, floating all those samples and then identifying all the seeds that are inside of them. And so we're hoping at the very end of that'll wrap everything all up, that'll wrap the entire site up, answer as many of the questions that we had about it, and be able to give us a really complete picture of the Nickerson family down there. This just goes to show what archaeology can actually tell you about the past, things that you can't get from the historical record. We didn't know what his house looked like. We didn't know that he had a palisade built around his house, one of the only palisades that's been found in New England. We didn't know how big his house was. We didn't know, what they were doing in their house, how well off they were. We had some hints from the historical documents, but we didn't know exactly how well off they were. And we didn't know that William Nickerson liked to dabble in things like metallurgy. It seems like he was making things out of brass. He was cutting brass and making it into various things, like a bed warmer and possibly a finger ring with some of the things that we found down there. And it seems like he was actually smelting iron as well. He was taking local bog iron that he found on Cape Cod, and he was smelting that and trying to make it into iron. I don't think he was successful with it because it seemed like it was a one-time shot that we found down there. But it goes to show that, he was experimenting with all these different things. I think of what William Nickerson had hoped to do is he hoped to build his own little Nickerson community down there in Chatham. He wanted to have a little Nickerson built down in Chatham. That's why he had acquired this land, this vast parcel of land, 4 square miles, 1,000 acres, that was down there, and set up for his family to live there, set up different home sites for his family. And then he was trying to find a way to make some money off that property that he had acquired. And so one of the things was by finding this iron and then using the iron, trying to make the iron and see if he could make that into a profitable business as well. We also know he was doing things like getting pitch from the trees and making tar out of it as well. So all these different sort of money-making operations that he was trying to do in Nickersonville down there on Cape Cod, just goes to show what kind of person he was. And that's all things that we would not know about if we had not done the archaeology. And for the Chatham Conservation Foundation, who owns the property, it's one thing to be able to say, the William Nickerson's home site is out there. It's another thing to be able to say, we know exactly where it is. So if we want to put in a park bench out there, we want to put some signage, we know where we can put that without destroying anything. Otherwise, you could just, randomly destroy the hearth. They could have, randomly dug up the coin that was there, the oak tree sixpence that we found, or something like that, and could have just, really destroyed something that they just didn't know was there. So that's one of the things that I try to promote, is that archaeology is great because you have to know what you're trying to preserve, basically. It's one thing to say that the property is significant because it may have been where a house was, but when you know where that house is, it raises significance. It raises people's awareness of the archaeological remains that are out there, and the fragility of the archaeological remains that are there. The fact that when you drive down the street and you see a bulldozer that's bulldozing some hill and putting in a new house somewhere on Cape Cod, there could have been something really significant that's there. We don't know how many of these early settler houses have been destroyed as a result of progress. But when we're able to identify the house, we can get it protected. They're hoping to put it onto the National Register. It's on the state site files, so the state archaeologist knows where it is. We get these reports. We put these reports up online, and so people can read these reports and see it. And you can go visit the site. Now it's all clear. It's all clear and beautiful. You can see it from the road. You can walk out there and walk around the site. And if you have the map, you can know exactly where William Nickerson's house is on the site there, and it gives you a better sense of the past, a better sense of what people had been doing in the past.
Greg, that's just fascinating to me. You just brought history to life for all of us, I think. And what I'd like to do is go to some questions. Please, if you have questions, type them in the chat room. And I have one here. It says, did William Nickerson own a loom?
We know that he was left a loom from his father-in-law when his father-in-law died in his father-in-law's will. We don't know what he ever did with it. We don't know if he actually liked weaving. We don't know if he brought that loom down to Chatham and used it down there or not. We don't have his probates. We don't know what was in his house when he died. And so we don't know exactly, if he continued to be a weaver down in Chatham or not. But he was gifted one, when his father died, and so his father-in-law died. So there's a possibility they did, but we didn't find any artifacts that would be directly associated with it. But a loom in the 17th century is mostly made out of wood anyway, so you probably wouldn't really find much left over.
But you did find a wooden post from the house. And what condition was the wood? Was it petrified? I don't know how old wood has to be petrified, but is it any evidence of that?
It wasn't petrified so much, but it was still intact. It was sort of the center portion of the wood. We think it was probably larger, and it had just rotted down, and so we still had the central core of the wood. So some of the posts we found were kind of spongy and soft, and other ones were really solid enough that we could remove them and be able to analyze them. And another thing we had found is when the fire had happened in the house, a number of the boards that had been on the chimney had burned, and we actually recovered some of the boards that had been just turned to charcoal. It's like something from Pompeii. It had been completely turned to charcoal, and we were able to put a preservative onto it that stabilized it, and we were able to save those as well. And so somebody who's really into carpentry maybe will be able to look at those and be able to say something significant. So we want all these artifacts to be available to people in the future, to be able to look at, researchers or people with an interest to look at the stuff and be able to add more to the story, basically.
Well, then what kind of wood was it? Were they oak trees or pine trees or what?
We think it was cedar. We think there were cedar trees.
That's right.
Cedar trees. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Where is everything stored now?
Right now, it's still here at my house/lab. I have all the artifacts here. It's all going to be going down to the Nickerson family. They're going to be curating all the artifacts down there in their building. Basically, there's an agreement between the Nickerson family and the Chatham Conservation Foundation that the Nickerson Family Association will curate all the artifacts and make them available for people. And then once we have the things conserved, the artifacts conserved, they want to put some exhibits out. They want to do an exhibit, I know, at the Atwood House. They've been talking about that for a while. And they also want to have a permanent exhibit there at the Nickerson Family Association as well.
When I was out at the site, which it just felt so good. There's a feeling when you go out there on that land. It's amazing. But I understand, and I saw evidence of it, that there was a parking lot there. Christopher Ryder had, I guess, owned that property at one time, and the asphalt is underneath the dirt still there. Does that interfere with some archaeological digs for you all?
Luckily, it's all over near where the Nickerson family has their buildings, the genealogy building and the historical house. I guess there was a parking lot there for the restaurant that was across the street, and the parking lot was dug up and kind of just pushed off to the side, basically. So it's not up at the actual home site. So there really hasn't been anything that's happened up there except for plowing. The area had been plowed after with William Nickerson, William and Ann stopped living there. It's been plowed over the centuries, but that actual asphalt stuff is more over towards the Nickerson Family Association property. So luckily we didn't have any problem with that. But the only real disturbance we saw up there was looked like some kids were playing Army Man out there, and they dug some big pits in a couple of the areas of the site. So, but they didn't dig them right into the house or anything. They were kind of off to the site. So that's always kind of neat to see.
All right, there's another question. Is the Shell Drive property really likely to date from the time of William Nickerson's son, circa 1700s?
That's one of the things we're still investigating. We kind of got stymied because of COVID. We weren't able to go down to the Barnstable County Courthouse and look at the deeds that are down there, the deeds and the records. Looking at the building itself, it's got a lot of characteristics that can date it right back to 1700. At the same time, it's been lived in since that time, and so as a result, there's been add-ons and there's been modifications to it. And so from the timbers we see, the things that we can see on it, there's a possibility that it could date right back to 1700, right back to William Nickerson II, basically. But we're going to have to wait and see if they decide to move the house on the property. We're hoping maybe do some archaeology down there and see if we can find some artifacts that date to the same time period. And then when the Barnstable County Courthouse opens up again, we're going to go down and do the research and see if we can find anything. I mean, I know there was a fire that happened down there, in the 19th century, and possibility that some of those things got destroyed, but we're hoping there might be some sort of little clues down there as well. So archaeology is a big detective story, and we're trying to put together a bunch of little clues to come up with a good story at the end.
Oh, Protect Our Past has an agreement with the current owner, to do a dendrochronology on the house. So we're working on that. Maybe you and I should talk afterwards about that. We have another question. This is from someone who says, our house is nearby on Fox Hill Road. It's early 18th century and was moved there from Wellfleet in the early 1930s. It must have been placed on an early shell. Is it called Midden or Midden?
Yeah, Midden. Yep.
As children, we used to find arrowheads sorry, I have to pull this down so I can see the whole question. And anywhere you dug on the ground, my goodness, there were tons of oyster shells. My understanding is that it was a tribal gathering place. There's a freshwater spring there as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Craig.
Yeah, I'm sure it must be. There's a lot of shell middens all over Cape Cod, of course. And even Henry David Thoreau talked about it in his travels on Cape Cod, talked about all the shell middens that were there. What we've been able to do is, with the shell midden that we had at our site, is we do some archaeological techniques which get really boring, which involve measuring each of the individual little stone flakes, the leftovers from making arrowheads, and looking at the angle of the percussion when they were being made and materials and things like that. And we were able to determine that the shell midden on our site anyway looks like it was just sort of a temporary spot, a spot where people just came and stopped by for a little while, did a little bit of stone tool maintenance, gathered some shellfish for a short period of time, and then we're actually living somewhere else. We didn't have a lot of pottery. We didn't have a lot of finished tools. We had things that are sort of in progress. But there are other shell middens that are on Cape Cod that were definitely places where it looks like people gathered together and hung out for a while, and maybe there were a lot of feasts and celebrations throughout the year that Native people would participate in. And so I think a lot of these shell middens could be the result of that as well. A big party, where a bunch of different villages maybe would come together, or maybe different families from different villages would come together and meet together and hang out for a little while and share things, share stories, as well as sharing food and trade things.
Nancy, you have your hand up.
Yes, that was my question. So because it's up on the rise as you're going down Fox Hill Road toward Crow's Pond. It's just before you go down the hill. So it would have been a sort of overlook of that area. And when we were kids, of course, it wasn't as forested as it is now. Now it's all, my mother gave much of that land to conservation. But it really worries me when I see big projects going on, what's being dug up and thrown away. I mean, anyone would be welcome to come and, dig a spade in down where we used to find a lot of shells, but it's conservation land now and it's totally overgrown. But I think the reason we found arrowheads up near the house was that there had been minimal digging up to set the house down. They just set it on cinder blocks, really, a cinder block foundation. And when we went to replace the sagging floor a couple of years ago, the beams under there still have the bark on. I mean, it was all hand hewn. It may be early, maybe a first period interior of a later, so probably 1730, because there were collection moldings, etc.
Oh. Well,
Yeah.
That sounds great. Yeah, I'd love to talk to you about it more. I want to try to record as many of the houses and many of the sites that people know about on Cape Cod. Sometimes all you can do is just get it registered with the state, and hope that maybe the landowner will let you do a dig or something before they decide to construct the house. But
Right.
I often get contacted by people that say, "Oh, there's a big shellman that's being destroyed when they're building a new house down there." And you go and you talk to the contractor, and they're like, "No, you don't go on the property. Stay off the property. We don't want anybody to do anything there."
Right.
Unless there's a town law or something like that, then it's up to the property owners to allow you to be able to do any kind of investigation on it. But having land as being part of conservation land now, I mean, the site is saved that way. And if you ever wanted to do anything on the rest of the property, we could always do an excavation and try to get the rest of the site recorded. And like I said, I'd love to see the architecture of the house as well. So.
Yeah. I think it's a really big problem that you just touched on. When you find that there's something of archaeological value. I'm up in Hingham where we also live, and I know that across the street there's a graveyard, and I've been told that people would have to pay to have it surveyed and prove that it's there before the state could do anything. Well, it's invasive and expensive, and there's got to be something better than that.
Yeah, sometimes we use ground penetrating radar, which is non-invasive, to be able to identify things that could be graves. But it's always like, someone can always come back and say, well, is that really a grave, or is it just a big rock that's down there or something like that? So unfortunately, sometimes it has to be invasive, to be able to identify it. But yeah, it's a hard thing.
In this case, a developer took away the gravestones, and we know that whole story. So yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well,
long ago, but
Craig, could you give everybody information how they get in touch with you so that Nancy or anybody else who wants something they want to ask you or have you look at?
Yeah, I've got a website. It's PlymouthArch.com, PlymouthArch.com, PlymouthArch.com. Or you can email me directly at craig@PlymouthArch.com. I love to hear from anybody, especially people on Cape Cod. So working on writing a book about the archaeology of Cape Cod, and one of the things I want to include is stuff that people know about. Things that people have, sites that people know about, that aren't well known, and try to get that kind of information into the book as well and get that out to people, so people can get a better understanding about the great archaeology there is on Cape Cod. It's one of the really unique places in Massachusetts. Got a lot of 17th century stuff and a lot of really unique Native American stuff down there as well.
Just a little note, Chris and his son were at our property, and his son, who is wonderful, said, "Can I check for something?" And they have found what looks like a mysterious black metal box under our willow tree, and we haven't taken any further than that. That just happened a few days ago, and it's like, Okay, what's in
Huh.
the box? So
Yeah.
you never know, and I'm sharing that with everyone because it never crossed my mind to do this. And it's only because we're working on something together, and his son, Chris Seaford's son, is so passionate about it and so knowledgeable that he said, "Oh, can I come?" I said, "Oh, sure." And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I have a hole under my willow tree and we don't know what it is. So it's all in the roots. It's so much fun, and it makes history tangible. So I highly recommend that anybody who's interested at all in just having their property looked at. It's really simple. They do a plug, which is where you start. They put it right back. You can't even see where it would happen. So they're not going to destroy your property. And so it's just the coolest thing. And I'm just so excited to have all that. There are a couple more questions. Is there a website that has all the survey information that you presented? This is all being recorded and will be on our YouTube site, protectourpast.org. And if there are any problems in reaching it, just contact me, Ellen, at Protect Our Past, and I'll see if I can direct you there. Another question, did the Nickersons or the Busbys come over on the Mayflower?
They came over on, I forget the name of the ship. It was in 1637. They came over during the Great Migration on one of the other ships that came in up in Boston. So it wasn't the Mayflower, but it was one of the early ships. And I said I don't remember exactly. I'm not even sure if we know the name. I forget. I have to look that up. But no, they did not come in the Mayflower, but they came over later on another ship.
Okay, we could go on and on. Does anybody have any other questions that they want to unmute and just ask instead of typing before we thank Craig for this very interesting lecture? Anybody, anyone? Okay, well, I'm just fascinated. I feel like someone's waking me up to what really Cape Cod is about, and we need to protect it. So please, keep in touch with us. Let me come to our website, go to our website, protectourpast.org. Craig, it was fantastic. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I want to tell everybody what's happening. Yes, round of applause. Bravo, 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 bravo. And you worked so hard. I mean, you just came right in from another dig and you sat down and you're just spewing all this wonderful information. I have a lot to learn. Thank you so much. But our next lecture is going to be by Niels Bachman, who's written a book, The Jonah of Cape Cod. Listen carefully. Peleg Nye was a whaler. He worked on a whaling ship. He fell off the ship. He was swallowed by a whale, and he lived to tell the tale. And that's what you're going to hear when you come to the next lecture. The story of Peleg Nye, the Jonah of Cape Cod. I can hardly wait. That's going to be amazing. I just can't even imagine. So, you know how to sign up for the next lecture. Go to our website. In the meantime, go to our social media, which is Protect Our Past USA Facebook, Protect Our Past Instagram, Protect Our Past YouTube's, and protectourpast.org. Soon you will see our new series about the sail loft story, which is I think it's so well done, and it's just the beginning of what we're all about. So look forward to having you be part of Protect Our Past by joining our lectures and every other way that you can reach us. If you have any questions or want to contact me, Ellen at protectourpast.org. It's real simple. Silent auction. We will be putting it up soon, but just keep those dates in mind. June 17th, our next lecture, we're going to introduce it. And boy, do we have some really great stuff. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. It's a real pleasure to have you join us for this lecture. Again, Craig, bravo. Enjoy your evening. Craig, would you stay on for just a minute? I want a question for you.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Craig, we're always thinking about auction items. And I wondered if you have an idea of a cool experience, because we want this to be about experiencing history, not just stuff.
Yep.
So I wondered if you had, I mean, just crossed my mind that maybe there's something you might want to put together that we can offer up for an auction item.
Yeah, I mean, I could do something like a 1 day dig at someone's house or something like that if they wanted to. A free 1 day dig at someone's house, a free 1 day survey, or a free, walkthrough of someone's historic house to try to record some of the structure of the house. I don't have any public digs going on right now that I can invite anybody to.
That's all right. If I have your email now, if I send you a donor form, you can just fill it in the way you want and give us a picture that makes it fun. And yeah, let's go for it. I think it'd be really, I mean, I am just completely blown away by having Ethan find this box. It's down about, I don't know how many, so it's maybe 1.5 to 2 feet deep.
Wow. Yeah,
And
I don't know what it is.
don't know what it is.
No.
And it is going to be tough to get out because all the roots are just grown of the willow tree, because the willow tree was planted in the 60s. So it was, we'll see.
Oh.
But it just completely infected me, and I'm excited. So if I send that to you, if you fill it, I think that would be really fun.
Okay.
Really
yeah, that
fun.
sounds good to me. Yeah.
We've got to get people involved.
That's right.
Yes, this is a good way to do it. Well, I'm sure we'll be in touch for other reasons as well, but you go and enjoy the rest of your evening. You've been working hard, and then you did this on top.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you very much for having me.
It was great. And come by someday. Do you know where I am?
Nope. Where are you?
I'm in Chatham. Where are you?
I'm in New Bedford, but I come to Chatham pretty often. So.
Okay. Well, my address is 72 Shore Road. And we rescued the guest windmill that my great uncle built out of shipwreck beams and brought it over to this property, and we're restoring it.
Oh, wow.
So
that's very cool.
Yeah, so it'd be fun to have you come by sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. Ah, all right.
All right.
Good.
Thanks so much. And thank you, Joshua, for helping me get through all this, all the technology. Great stuff. You all enjoy your evening.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.